52. And this is titled Jesus in the Temple at Passover. Each year his parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to their custom. After the festival was over, they were returning home. But the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't know it. Supposing that he was among their band of travelers, they journeyed on for a full day while looking for him among their family and friends. When they didn't find Jesus, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. And after 3 days, they found him in the temple. He was sitting among the teachers, listening to them and putting questions to them. Everyone who heard him was amazed by his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were shocked. His mother said, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Listen, your father and I have been worried. We've been looking for you." Jesus replied, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what it was he said to them. Jesus went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. His mother cherished every word in her heart. Jesus matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and with people. This is the word of God. You may be seated. Well, good morning. My name is Marshall Coleman. I'm the youth director here. Whether we have crossed paths or not, I'm so happy for the opportunity to share with you this morning. It is unofficially National Youth Director Sunday, which means it's the time that all of the pastors take a little break after Christmas Eve and allow the guys to, like me, to come off the bench and preach. So, very excited. So, thanks. This is. I'm going to do it one more time, and he can reprimand me for this for doing this 3 times. But that's okay. It's also congratulations, the first time in a while you guys can hear a good sermon. So good on you. We're glad for that. There we go. Again, that's George Cathcart. I'm going to write that down just so you guys know that he gave me that one. Yeah, I said it. You're right. Yep. So that's okay. That's all right. And it is also New Year's Eve. So wish your neighbor Happy New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's. There we go. Yeah, almost into 2019. Almost there. So has anyone ever lost something that you held valuable? We all have, right? In some way. Anybody ever lost a pet in the neighborhood? You're searching, you're looking everywhere. Yeah, lots of people. Maybe any parents who are brave enough to admit maybe you lost your child in Target or Walmart sometime, something like that. A few people. All right, you are not helping at our next youth ministry trip. There we go. All right. So I'm very happy that this is the story I get to share with you and go over this morning too, because this is one that I think fits perfectly, since Jesus was a 12-year-old in this story, and I deal with 12 to 18-year-olds on a daily basis. So it's very exciting for me. Makes me wonder if Jesus was playing dodgeball during this time or not. I don't know. I can speculate, I guess. So just to give you a little rundown and summary of this story and what fully happened, and the paraphrasing of it a little bit. Jesus and his family are traveling to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And so they go there and they celebrate, and on their way back, Jesus and Mary hold on, something's not right, because they left something. They left their son. Jesus is in Jerusalem, and so he escaped away, and so they go back after 3 days searching for him, and they find him in the temple. And so after finding him, they try to give him a talking to, and then he gives them a talking to, but then he comes back with them, and he's obedient, and he continues to follow the ways that God is leading him towards as the Messiah. So it's obviously easy to look at this story from the outside looking in and be judgmental, and to think, if there's any child you shouldn't lose, maybe it's not this one. Like, how on earth could they lose this child above all else? I mean, let's ask Mary and Joseph. Remember that whole thing about the Messiah, him being the Messiah? You guys remember that? And the angel showing up to you, Mary, and to you in your dream, Joseph. And Mary, remember that big old bump that just showed up out of nowhere? You didn't forget that, did you? No. Or how about the shepherds that showed up? Or the Magi that came later? Or how about the fact that they told us that this is the one king that's going to save us all, the one we've been talking about and hearing about for so long? This is him. Maybe you put a tracking device on him, or even crueler, you put a leash on him at all times, make sure he stays so you don't lose him. Maybe the angels like missed the point and be like, by the way, don't lose him. Maybe that's something they should have added at the end. I mean, shouldn't they have been better parents, we could ask, and not lose the Savior of all mankind? And I just love to think of the conversation that's going on between Mary and Joseph when they realize what happened. Like Joseph is doing if he's like anything like me, he's like, just a typical husband. Everything's good and great. There's nothing really wrong. And he's walking along, and then Mary comes to him, and she shows him that there's a problem. You know what I'm talking about? So she's like, Joseph. He's like, what's up? He's like, where is Jesus? He's like, what? I thought he was with you. She's like, no. He was clearly supposed to be with you. Where is he? And they both look at each other and realize, oh man, where is he? We forgot him. We lost him. We got to go searching for him. And so they do. They go looking. And so this always makes me think of my favorite Christmas movies, Home Alone 1 and 2, as crazy as they are. I love them. And so like in Home Alone 2, when Kevin's mom is in the airport and she realizes that she lost her son again for the second time, and so kind of like this happened maybe. There you go. Maybe Mary's just like, Jesus! And then she falls over. One of those. Could be that. Who knows? And so there was a time that, many times, that I actually snuck off and got lost from my parents, but there's one time in particular that sticks out. When I was younger, we moved to Orlando. That's ended up where I was grew up for the rest of most of my life until I moved here. But as we were coming in, like nobody wants to be the new kid in school, right? Nobody wants to be known as that. And so at the school I was at before, I was the tall kid. I was taller than everybody in my class, so it was nice to be known as the tall kid and not the new kid. Well, coming in, there were two other kids who were taller than me. So I'm not going to be the tall kid. I'm going to be the new kid. So it's like, oh my gosh, that's not good. And so one of those weekends, we went to a place called the Lucas Nursery. It's a nursery, a farm for trees and plants and all kinds of stuff. Just the most boring place that you can take a young boy. Just not fun. And on top of that, it was incredibly hot. It was like hotter than Houston summer hot. Humid upon humid, just like this. You guys understand the heat, but it was miserable. And on top of that, I didn't eat anything that morning or drink anything that morning. And so I'm walking with my parents, and I'm hungry, but I'm really thirsty. I'm so thirsty. And my parents are like, okay, we are leaving in 2 minutes. I promise we'll go. And so what felt like 3 hours, which is more than likely 2 minutes, I couldn't wait any longer. So I go off, and I sneak away from my parents, and I go and search for water on my own. And so I go to the bathroom area, and I find a water fountain. So I'm like, okay, good. But it's jammed, and the water's not coming out. It's like, oh, great. I'll just go in the bathroom, maybe find a sink. The bathrooms are out of order. They're shut down, and they're locked. So it's like, oh, goodness. But then as I'm walking out of the corner of my eye, I see it, and it's beautiful. It's this silver spigot, and it's like calling my name. It's like, Marshall, come over here. There's water. So I'm like, great. So I walk over to the spigot, and I turn it on, and it's like, oh, this is glorious. This is quenching my thirst. This is so good. This is exactly what I was hoping for. But as that's happening, I hear a voice in the distance screaming, Marshall, no! And it's my mom. And so she comes running, she grabs me, she's like, do you realize what you did? Do you realize what's happened? I'm like, well, now come think of it. This water tastes really chunky. Like incredibly chunky. I don't remember drinking any water that was ever chunky. And on top of that, it doesn't taste good at all. And then she's like, well, look at what it is. And it attached to this spigot, my eye was blinded to the giant tank that it was connected to, which is full of mud and dirt and plants and grossness. She says, do you know what that is? I'm like, no, it's fertilizer water. It's like, oh gosh. So she calls the ambulance, and the ambulance comes, like, hey, they check me out, and they give me a glass of water, thank goodness, a real glass of water, and he's going to be okay. We recommend going to the family doctor to see. So I went to the family doctor, ran a few things, and they said, you should be okay, just come back in a couple weeks so we can check on you. So that's okay. So I went to school, and then 2 weeks later, I go to the doctor, and I grew 6 inches. So now who's the tall kid? There you go. True story. No joke. True story. So my thirst was quenched, not in the way I was expecting, but it was. So that's the story of me getting lost in the Lucas Nursery. But of course, looking at the story when Jesus got lost, it's so easy to lose sight of everything that happened. When people traveled to Jerusalem for Passover, large bands of large caravans of people, like all got together, and they walked and they traveled together for security and for safety. And so normally Jerusalem's population was around 25,000 people, and during Passover it was more than likely exceeding 100,000 people, which was gigantic, 4 times as much. And so as they traveled, women and children traveled in one part, and then the men traveled in another part. And so when the boys would become older, around 11 or 12, like Jesus, and remember when they're 13, they're considered men, so they're close to manhood, they'd start traveling with the women, and then as the trip progressed, they went and they traveled with the men the rest of the way. And so in the midst of the leaving from Jerusalem to come back, somewhere there was a communication error between the husband and the wife, the parents, Mary and Joseph. Any parents or spouses out there ever had any communication errors? Okay, only a few. Wow, that's good. I'm still waiting on mine today. Pam hasn't told me I've done anything wrong yet, so we're good. So once they realize that Jesus is gone, they talk it out and they go and they search for him eventually after 3 days they're searching and they're looking. Just imagine the panic. I mean, losing the child has to be the most unsettling, nerve-wracking, heartbreaking thing that can happen. I mean, it's one thing if you lose your keys and your wallet and your phone every 10 minutes like me, but it's another to lose your flesh and blood. And so finally, they think, let's think like our son. Where could he be? Where would he be if we were him? And they find him in the temple. And so if that's where they think that he is and he ends up being there, what does it say about Jesus? It says that he was devoted and that he was more than interested in the scriptures and in worship. Now, every Jewish young boy would go through and he'd learn the scriptures and he'd have knowledge of it, but perhaps this boy was more than likely unusually devoted to these stories in the scriptures. And so when they get there and they see he's with the temple teachers see that he's obviously devoted and he's knowledgeable and he appears passionate about these stories in the scriptures. But also they notice maybe that there's something different about this boy. Maybe there's something even special about this young man. Because Jesus, he already knew who he was. He was maybe continuing to learn what that meant every day as he moved forward, as both human and God in the flesh. But make no mistake, I believe he already knew. And then Mary and Joseph, they come swarming in, and Mary does the typical motherly thing of where if your mom ever busted into your room and she's like pointing the finger at you, or she's like standing like this, or the hands on the hips, she does that when she walks in the temple. She's like, "Child, where on earth have you been? Me and your father have been worried sick. We've been looking all over for you. What on earth were you thinking?" So Jesus replies with a question. A question that maybe we need to be thinking more often than not. Why were you looking for me? Why were you searching for me? Then he shares it's necessary for him to be in his Father's house, in the temple, in the place of worship. He shares he's exactly where he should be. And he shares exactly who he is, though yet his parents don't really fully understand what that means yet. And his parents understanding and grasping who he truly was and what that meant was definitely a journey, a process, a step-by-step story of growth and learning and seeking and searching. And so the story finishes with, after this conversation that Jesus had with his mom, Jesus went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, and his mother cherished every word in her heart. And Jesus matured in wisdom and years and in favor with God and with people. I believe asking more why questions about Jesus and his life is the heart of living a life that models after him. It's the heart of falling in love with Jesus. Asking the question, why are you searching for him? Why am I searching for Jesus? Those are words to be cherished. And when you cherish and treat words like that like a treasure in your heart, like his mother did. Those things form the way you live and the way you love. So regardless if you've been in this relationship with Jesus for 60 new years or 60 new seconds, or you're still trying to figure out what this whole thing about Jesus is, it's important to ask, why would I be searching for Jesus, or why am I searching in my everyday life? It will lead us to know exactly why we should believe that he is exactly who he said he was. It will lead us to see things the way he intended for us to see them, to follow in the way that he intends for us to follow, to love the way we were intended to love, to live the way we were intended to live, with overwhelming compassion and the utmost patience and the audacity to listen without responding, and the devotion of ourselves to the Scriptures and learning what they tell us about who we are and who God is, and the tenderness to forgive the worst of the worst, and maybe even give us a mind that forgets the doubt and discouragement and remembers when God has provided over and over and over again and has always been right there with us. Maybe even with the heart to go to those who are tough for us to attend to and to be present with. The willingness to get out of our comfort zones and feed the hungry and care for the poor and attend to our neighbors and be present with especially those who might be different than us. And maybe even above all, lead us to have a soul that stays thirsty. To stay thirsty for the one that the prophet Isaiah says in the river, that he is like a river of water that will never run out. One who is full of life and joy and peace, this Jesus. And to keep living this out on an authentic, consistent basis. Not just because you want to, but because you feel the desire and the passion to. Staying thirsty to live and love in this way, maybe more than just once or twice a year at a church event. Living out Jesus because you love who he is and who he has always been. Instead of just listening to people talk about him up here at the pulpit for a once-a-week pick-me-up. Because when we ask why questions, like Jesus did, then we can start searching for the answer. We can search for living a life that follows after Jesus, not just in the new year or in every year that comes after, or 2019 or 2020, or every day that we're gifted. And when we specifically ask, why am I searching for you, Jesus? Why am I searching for you, the one who is like the water that will never run out? Then you can have your eyes opened to finally see the source that will quench your thirst. Will you pray for me, or pray with me? God of water that never runs dry, God of provision in the desert, God of the one who gives us grace and mercy, especially when we don't deserve it. We thank you for all that you have done in providing and bringing your Son to this world for the sake of loving us. God, as we go into this new year, may we take the truth of who you are and live it out. And help us to continue to ask, why would we be searching for you? So that we can find the answers and see you in all things. Help us to be the bearers of that light that you give us. And continue to lead us into this new year. And we ask all these things, Jesus, in your holy and precious name. Amen.